He hired a cook for beans. She arrived with 2 kids, and they called him Papa. In Dry Creek, late 1880s, Eli Mercer, a quiet, weathered rancher, only wanted a cook to see him through the winter beans. But Ruth Colton didn't come alone. At her side were 2 children, eyes hungry for shelter, and a question that stole the air from Eli's chest. "Are you a papa?" One word, and the cold house trembled as if fire had been lit inside. Eli Mercer didn't much care for company. He cared for the wind across Llano Estacado, the bite of black coffee in the mornings, and the long quiet that hung around Dry Creek after sundown. That morning, the sky was the color of an old tin cup, and a stiff north wind rattled the porch boards as he hammered the battered notice on the general store wall. Ranch cook needed room and board. Quiet man, long season. He figured if anyone showed, they'd do it out of hunger, not hope. 2 days later, just as the blue norther swept grit over the pasture, Eli saw them coming, a woman leading 2 kids, mud-caked boots dragging, skirt hem torn. The boy clung to her hand, hair wild, cheeks streaked with dust. The girl walked silent but steady, eyes sharp as a hawk's. They came up the drive without a word for the mountains or the sky, just a hard stare at Eli's cabin like it might not last the winter. Eli opened the door before they could knock a second time. The woman hesitated, shoulders squared, jaw tight. "Name's Ruth Colton," she said, her voice more grit than honey. "I cook, I clean, I got 2 with me." She glanced at the kids. "Etta's 7, Noah's 5. Eli wasn't much for small talk. He'd buried his wife in that dry ground 2 years back, and he'd lived alone since. Grief settled on a man like dust, quiet, steady, part of every morning. "All right," he said, stepping aside. "Y'all best come in." The cabin's warmth took them hard. Ruth staggered but caught herself before her knees gave out. She eased the kids out of their coats, set them by the stove. Etta curled up tight, arms around her knees. Noah just stared at the fire, eyes wide, silent as stone. Eli watched Ruth move, quiet, no wasted step, hands raw but sure. She looked over his shelf, a sack of beans, salt pork, maybe enough flour for a week. "That'll do," she muttered, rolling up her sleeves. Not a word passed between them for the next hour. Ruth sorted beans, checked the pork, set water to boil. The kids stayed glued to the stove, Etta pulling Noah's boots straight like she'd done it 100 times. Eli noticed how Ruth flinched if he got too close, how her hands trembled only when she thought no one saw. Dinner was silent, beans thick with smoke, a slab of pork, nothing fancy. Noah was the first to break it. He looked up, mouth full, and asked, "Are you a papa?" Ruth froze, spoon in midair. Eli didn't flinch. He just looked down at the boy and said, "I was." Noah nodded like, "That made sense. You can be ours now," he said. Ruth's spoon hit the pot with a clatter. She stood so quick the chair scraped loud. "Noah," she snapped, sharp as a blade, but the boy just stared at Eli, waiting. Eli didn't smile, didn't look away. "Maybe I'll try to be worth something," he said, voice low. They didn't settle much after that. The kids curled up by the fire. Ruth lay out on the rag rug beside them. Eli lay awake in his cot, staring up at the knotty pine ceiling, haunted by the old ghosts that came out when the wind howled through the cracks. Somewhere outside, a coyote called. Inside, Ruth's breath was ragged, the kind that comes from running too long and hoping too little. Eli listened to the small sounds, the ticking stove, Noah's sleepy mumbling, Etta's slow, even breaths. He found himself hoping, just for a moment, that come morning they'd still be here, that maybe this time nobody would run. By dawn, the cold had crept in through every board and crack, bone-deep kind of chill that made even the stove seem small. Ruth was already up, rolling biscuits with the last of the flour, Eli could smell coffee boiling and bacon frying. A scent he'd near forgot could make a man feel halfway alive. He sat by the window and watched the day begin. Blue-gray light washing over the empty yard, windmill creaking slow. The boy, Noah, shuffled over, rubbing his eyes. "Ma'am says I can help with eggs," he whispered. Ruth just nodded and pushed a battered pan his way. Etta helped string kindling, her small hands quick and practiced, face half hidden beneath a mop of dark hair. Eli moved quiet through his morning, checking the well, tightening the hinges on the barn door, feeding the single mule. The work steadied him like always. But something in the air felt off. He noticed the windmill. One of the bolts was looser than it had any right to be, not just from weather. He knelt and tightened it, fingers numb in the wind. Inside, Ruth hummed under her breath as she worked. There was something sad in the way she avoided the windows, how she flinched at the sudden clang of a bucket. She didn't ask about wages, didn't ask about how long they could stay. She just worked, kept her head down, eyes softening only when Etta or Noah came close. Mid-morning brought a tap at the porch. Eli opened the door to find Sheriff Frank Hollis standing there, hat in hand, eyes never steady. He handed Eli a folded sheet of paper, the kind that came with trouble. "Water rights, Eli. Creed and the syndicate filed for it last week. Might be a fight over the well before long." Eli read the paper, jaw set. "This land's mine. Ain't no syndicate gonna change that." Hollis just shrugged, looking past Eli into the shadows of the house. "Paper says what it says. You watch yourself." He tipped his hat at Ruth, who didn't look up, and was gone. After the sheriff left, Ruth set plates down gentle, hands barely, shaking now. "That kind of news come often?" she asked, voice low. Eli shook his head. "Not like this." The day stretched on, long and weary. Ruth taught Etta how to mend a tear in a sleeve. Etta careful with every stitch. Noah dragged a bucket out to the barn, nearly tipping it in the dust. Outside, the windmill clicked and whined, every turn of the blade whispering a worry Eli couldn't shake. Evening dropped quick on Dry Creek. As Ruth swept ashes from the stove, Etta stared out the window, silent. "You think we'll stay?" she whispered, not sure if her mother heard. Ruth didn't answer, but she lingered at the window long after dusk fell, watching the old mesquite tree sway against the night. Later, as Eli made his last round outside, he caught a mark on the bark, just below eye level, almost lost in the rough, a jagged cross burned in with pine pitch, the edges still black and raw. He touched it, eyes narrowed, and listened to the wind. For the first time in years, Eli Mercer felt the uneasy weight of being watched. And inside, with the lamp burning low, Ruth held her children close, steadying herself for whatever was coming next. The days ran dry and long. By the time the noon sun hit the windmill, Eli's tongue felt like cotton, and the dust in his throat was thick as old grief. He watched the well bucket drop, listened for the hollow echo of water. Not much left. Ruth rationed what she drew, wiping her brow, saving every last cup for the children first. She didn't complain, not once, but her eyes grew sharper, and the lines beside her mouth cut a little deeper with every trip to the pump. Etta was quiet as a stone those days, trailing her mama, always watching. It was Noah who broke the silence, chasing after the half-wild chickens, hands flapping, laughter bubbling up, even when no one else found much to smile about. Ruth would let him be, only calling when his boots tracked mud through the door, or when Eli's old mule wandered too close to the garden fence. The windmill creaked, and Eli spent an hour tightening bolts, fixing what he could. But he kept thinking about the night before, the sheriff's warning, the mark on the mesquite. He checked the fence lines, boots crunching brittle grass, eyes on the horizon. It wasn't just the land that felt threatened. It was the quiet, too. The sense of peace that had settled like dust since Ruth and her kids arrived. Late that afternoon, as Eli fixed a loose plank on the north fence, Jed Crow came limping up the lane. The old man's hat was cocked at an angle, gray beard tangled, a battered rifle slung careless across his shoulder. He squinted at the ranch, then spat tobacco into the dirt. Saw some wagon tracks up on Miller's Ridge. Iron rims, not from round here. They ran close by your line, Eli. Eli's hand tightened on his hammer. You see anyone with them? Jed shook his head. Heard spurs, though. Not yours, not mine. That kind of click don't come from a man's own place. Back inside, Etta sat at the table, pencil clutched in her small fist. She drew careful lines, a cabin with 3 figures underneath, the word Papa written in shaky letters above the roof. Ruth watched over her shoulder, smoothing Etta's hair, but said nothing. The girl's shoulders relaxed, just a little. As dusk fell, Ruth stirred the beans slow over the stove, adding a pinch of salt. Noah sat at her feet, humming a tune only he seemed to know. Eli came in, boots heavy with red dust. He said little, but his eyes kept drifting to the window, then to the empty stretch of land past the barn. Night settled thick and close. The windmill's shadow stretched across the yard, thin as a warning. Etta crept out to the porch before bed, clutching her drawing. She watched as Eli checked the yard one last time, lantern held high. Her voice was almost too soft to hear. Are you scared? Eli paused, looking down at her. A man'd be a fool not to be sometimes, he said. She nodded, hugged her picture to her chest, and slipped back inside. Just before midnight, a sharp smell drifted through the dark. Eli opened the back door and found it on the old trough. A brand new scar, the crosscut X burned deep, resin still sticky. He scraped at it with his thumb, then looked out at the silent, open land. Something or someone was closing in. Inside, Ruth pressed her hand against the door, steadying herself. The cabin walls, thin as they were, would have to hold, for now. The next morning, light hit the mesa slow and pale, but there was no comfort in it. Eli was already outside, boots sunk in last night's dust, when the riders appeared. They moved together, 3 men in black coats, horses blowing steam in the cold. The lead man rode with the easy posture of someone who'd never worked a shovel, only pens and numbers. Silas Creed. Eli knew the name before he saw the face. Creed always came with paper, not bullets, but Eli reckoned he'd rather face a man with a gun than a banker with a signature. They reined up at the edge of the yard. Creed dismounted, brushed his coat sleeve, and walked up slow, glancing at the porch, the windmill, the old mesquite scarred with that fresh X. His eyes were pale as river ice. "Morning, Mr. Mercer," Creed called, voice smooth as store-bought whiskey. "I see you got new help around here." Eli didn't answer right off. He poured water from the tin cup into a bowl, slid it over for the horses. He didn't look up. "You want something, Creed?" Creed smiled, holding out a folded paper. "Syndicate owns this well now, filed just last week. Ranch's water rights been purchased. One way or another, you'll have to sell or be out come first frost." His men shifted behind him, hands too close to their gun belts. Ruth stood in the doorway, children behind her. She said nothing, face carved in stone, but Eli caught the small tremor in Etta's hand as she gripped her mother's dress. Eli took the paper, glanced it over, then set it on the porch rail. He poured another cup of water and offered it to Creed. "Ma'am cooks here. Children sleep here. Y'all ride on now." Creed didn't drink, just smiled cold. "I'll be back, Mr. Mercer. Some folks don't know when it's time to leave. We've got ways of helping them remember." He tipped his hat at Ruth, a gesture full of threat. The riders turned, boots scraping, and mounted up. They left slow, like they owned every inch of that dirt. When the dust settled, Ruth let out a long, quiet breath. Etta pressed in closer. Noah looked from Eli to his mama, trying to read the air. A little while later, a shape moved at the edge of the yard. A slim woman in faded buckskins, hair braided back tight, eyes sharp as splinters. Tala Redbird stepped out of the mesquite and crouched by the old trough. She ran a finger over the burnt X, then pulled a charcoal arrow from her pouch and set it gently on the mark. She looked up at Eli, her voice a low murmur, almost lost to the wind. "Ragged Cross Riders," she said. "That marks theirs." "Voss is with them. He'll come. They always do." Eli felt his jaw tighten. The old ghosts weren't just memories anymore. Inside, Ruth sat the children at the table and tried to busy her hands with peeling potatoes, but her eyes kept flicking to the window. She saw Creed's paper still lying on the porch rail, fluttering in the rising wind, and she wondered if anything on earth could hold together when so many hands wanted to tear it apart. Night settled early, heavy and still. The only sound was the windmill, creaking slow and tired in the dark, and the distant echo of hooves fading into the night. As the sun sank, the ranch house gathered in its quiet, a hush thick enough to taste, broken only by the soft click of Ruth's knitting needles and the rattle of wind against the glass. Eli moved through his routines, checking doors and windows, tightening hinges, running a practiced hand over every lock and latch. He kept his rifle leaning by the door and an eye on the windmill outside, its blades spinning lazy in the last red light. Inside, Ruth taught Etta how to mix up a small batch of cornmeal, fingers dusted yellow. She hummed under her breath, a tune without words, something she might have learned as a girl. Etta paid careful attention, kneading the dough with small, strong hands. Noah, face smudged, begged for stories. Ruth only smiled, tousling his hair, and pointed him toward Jed, who sat whittling on the porch steps, his old knife glinting. Jed grinned at the boy. "Back when I was your age, rattlesnakes wore boots." Noah giggled, but when he looked up at Ruth, her smile was pinched. The world outside seemed too close. That evening, Eli dragged a fresh log to the fire and asked, "Any news out your way, Jed?" The old man nodded, beard bristling. "Heard some spook cattle over by Big Rock. Fence cut clean, not a coyote neither. Tala saw more tracks. Deep ones, notched at the heel. Nightmen." Eli grunted, jaw working. "They come close, you holler. Don't wait for a second sign." Ruth went out to fetch water and stopped at the windmill. She caught her breath as she saw, not for the first time, the little things that kept a place standing, the clatter of a loose bolt, the faint smear of grease where Eli's hand had steadied the blade. She tightened the rope around the bucket, heart thudding with the sudden awareness of how fragile a home could be. That night, after supper, the routine changed. Eli split the night watch. He'd take the first hours, Ruth the last. She didn't argue. After the children slept, Ruth pulled on her coat, slipped the old lamp from its hook, and sat near the window, mending a shirt by the wavering light. Each pass of her needle felt like a prayer, steady, deliberate, necessary. Past midnight something shifted, a faint jingle, the kind that could be wind or something more. Eli sat up on his cot, feet on the floor, rifle in hand. The sound came again, a rope against a bell muffled. He moved outside, boots soundless on the packed dirt. Jed joined him, lantern low, eyes narrowed. In the dark, by the barn, they found the source, a bag of sand tied to the snare bell, muting its warning. Someone had come close, real close. Eli set the bag aside, jaw tight, and looked out across the range. "They're testing us," he said. "Next time, they won't just sneak." He and Jed circled the house, checking every window, every latch. Ruth, watching from inside, whispered to herself, "We stay." It was half promise, half hope. By morning, the water bucket was out of place, the well lid cracked open a finger's width, and a single boot print pointed straight at the back door. Inside, as the family woke to the pale new day, the coffee pot bubbled and the lamp guttered out, leaving the kitchen washed in uncertain gold. They all felt it. The world outside was closing in, and the only choice left was to stand together or fall apart. The air was sharp, the kind of morning that cuts straight to bone. Eli didn't wait for breakfast. He stepped out onto the porch, rifle in hand, and scanned the yard. There, at the edge of the property line, Creed sat astride a pale horse flanked by 4 men, every one of them looking for trouble. The dust on their boots and coats was fresh, like they'd ridden all night just to make their point. Eli stood his ground, hat brim low, shadow falling across his face. Creed called out, voice loud and oily, "You got my notice, Mercer. Last chance to make it easy on yourself. Sell the land, move on, or things'll get messy." The men behind him shifted, hands twitching at holsters. It was all for show, but that's how things started out here. Inside, Ruth pulled Etta close, wrapped a handkerchief around the girl's wrist, and tucked Noah beneath the table. Her own hand shook, but she made sure the children couldn't see. Eli kept his voice flat. "Ain't selling, not today, not any day. You want to push it, you go ahead. But you better be ready for what comes after." Creed's lips twitched. "You think a quiet man scares me? You're alone out here, Eli. Folks that stand alone tend to get forgotten." One of his men dismounted, walked up to the split-rail fence and yanked it down with a laugh, rails snapping, dust flying. Eli didn't raise his voice. He walked to the gap and with a single swing of his hammer, reset the rail in place. He never even looked at the man, just worked like it was any other morning. Creed snorted, "Spit in the dirt." "Have it your way, old-timer. We'll be back." He turned, nodding to his men. They mounted up, slow as death, and rode off, leaving nothing behind but boot tracks and bad air. When it was over, Ruth exhaled, not realizing she'd held her breath so long. She straightened Etta's dress and hugged Noah close. Eli came back in, dust and worry on his shoulders, but didn't say a word. He just hung his hat by the door and sat down at the table, hands folded tight. The rest of the day moved in uneasy silence. Jed sharpened tools out by the shed, keeping an eye on the ridge. Tala rode the fence line, scanning for more than just coyotes. Ruth kneaded bread over and over, as if the work could hold the walls together. Late in the afternoon, Tala returned, face hard. "Found ashes behind the barn," she said. "Somebody's been camping close, cooking slow, keeping low." Eli nodded, eyes clouded. "They're not leaving, not till they get what they came for." That night the wind picked up, rattling every window and setting the lamp to flicker. They ate their supper in near silence, listening to the storm gather outside. For a long moment, none of them spoke. The only sound was the creak of the windmill, turning out in the dark, and the steady breath of a house that refused to break. The wind came screaming over the plains that night, a blue norther, the likes of which Dry Creek hadn't seen in years. Dust slammed against the windows, seeping in through every crack, coating the table, the floor, the beds. By dawn, the world was a dull gray, sun hidden behind a wall of blowing grit. The house creaked and groaned as Eli braced the porch supports, pulling his coat tight, eyes squinted against the sting. Inside, Ruth kept the fire going, boiled coffee thick and black, watched as Etta sat quiet by the stove, head bowed over her rag doll. Noah pressed his nose to the pane, tracing lines in the dust with his finger, then turned to chase after the lone chicken huddling in the corner. Ruth let them be. She had too much on her mind to worry over mud and noise. Out back, Eli checked the windmill, feeling every vibration up through the tower. The whole contraption shook in the gale, bolts rattling, blades screaming. He climbed up, rope looped to his belt, hands numb from the cold. At the top, he spotted it, a missing cotter pin, one whole blade ready to snap loose. He braced himself and leaned out, fighting the wind, and just then a gust near took him down. But Eli held on, jaw clenched, and hammered the bolt home with all he had. It wasn't pretty, but it'd hold, for now. He came down to find Ruth in the yard, clutching Noah's collar as the boy tried to slip loose, chasing a tumbleweed. Etta was standing near the well, eyes big and worried. Eli reached her just as she slipped, a boot catching the edge of the stones, teetering. He grabbed her fast, hoisting her back with one strong arm. Neither of them said a word, but the fear lingered, raw and sharp as the wind. Back inside, Ruth set the coffee pot down with shaking hands. She poured 2 cups, slid one across to Eli, then wrapped her arms around both children and just breathed. For a while, no one said a thing. The storm howled, but inside it was only the crackle of the fire and the slow, steady pulse of family hanging on. After the dust settled and the house stopped trembling, Etta looked up at Eli, her voice barely more than a whisper. "Can I call you Papa?" She didn't look at him, just stared into her cup. Eli's reply was soft, almost lost in the quiet. "If you want." Ruth's eyes glistened, but she looked away, busying herself with the bread dough, pressing it into the pan harder than needed. Just before supper, Eli made one last check of the windmill. In the fading light, he noticed a fresh mark scratched into the paint, a single letter V, thin and sharp. He scraped at it, heart sinking. It wasn't nature did that. Someone was sending a message. Inside, Ruth hummed a lullaby, her voice trembling. Etta pressed close to her side, Noah crawling into Eli's lap without a word. The day ended with the house huddled tight against the world, wind singing through the gaps, and every soul inside waiting for what the next storm would bring. The next day dawned dull and colorless, the world outside still hushed from the storm. Eli walked the yard, boots kicking up a thin crust of dust. He checked the well, eyed the windmill, ran a hand down the back of the old mule, all while thinking on that thin, sharp V scratched into the metal. He couldn't shake the feeling something bad was coming closer with every sunrise. Ruth was busy inside, cleaning the glass chimney on the lantern, fussing over the coffee, setting the bread to rise. She tried to make a home out of this patched-up place, but the air was thick, like everyone was waiting for a door to slam or a gun to go off. Etta and Noah stayed near her, not arguing, not laughing, just quiet, each looking over their shoulder. That evening, as the sun dropped behind the far bluff, trouble came quiet as a thief. Ruth was out by the barn drawing water when the rope on the bucket jerked and slipped from her hand. The line went slack, and when she peered down the well, she saw the cover had been pried up and dropped back wrong. Heart hammering, she backed away, eyes searching the shadows. Suddenly, the horses in the small corral spooked, snorting, hooves churning, eyes wide with panic. Eli heard the commotion and came running, rifle in hand, but the horses were already pressed against the fence, shivering and wild-eyed. He followed the fence line and found a length of water hose cut clean, sliced through by a sharp blade. A pile of salt lay nearby, scattered in the dust. It wasn't a message, it was a warning. Inside, Ruth pressed her back to the door, fighting the old shakes. She told herself it was just the wind, just animals. But when she heard spurs jangling close by the porch, too close, too deliberate, her breath caught. She grabbed Etta and Noah, her voice sharp as flint, and pushed them behind the stove. Jed and Tala moved quick. Jed handed Ruth the lantern. "Hold the light, girl." Tala crouched low, spreading a handful of black coal ash by the doorstep. "We'll see who comes come sunrise," she said, voice no louder than a sigh. The house was locked down tight, but the night pressed in hard. Just past midnight, the lantern in the hallway swung wild, ripped from its hook with a screech. Eli leapt for the door and saw a shadow running fast and low. He gave chase, boots pounding, heart roaring in his ears. He caught the figure behind the chicken coop. Just a man, young, breath ragged, eyes rolling in fear. Eli pinned him to the ground. "Who sent you?" he growled. The man spat blood, shook his head. "Ain't my fight. Voss wants her. Creed wants water. I'm just here for my pay." Eli dragged him to the barn, tied his hands, left him in the cold with nothing but the night to talk to. Inside, Ruth sat by the fire, arms around both children, rocking back and forth, whispering, "We stay, we stay." A few hours later, just as the first birds began to call, the sheriff's lantern bobbed down the lane. Hollis, grim-faced and tired, demanded Eli hand over the captive. "Law says he's mine, and by order of the county, I'll be holding your rifle too, for everyone's safety." Eli said nothing, just handed over a battered shotgun instead of his Winchester, jaw set, eyes cold. As the sheriff and his prisoner disappeared into the gray light, Ruth stared after them, every muscle in her body coiled tight. "They're coming back," she whispered, "all of them." Outside, the windmill spun slow and silent, the house holding its breath, waiting for the next knock in the dark. Morning came pale, uneasy. Eli found Ruth standing in the kitchen, arms wrapped around herself, coffee untouched, the children still asleep in a tangle of blankets near the fire. He watched her for a moment, the lines of worry carved deep on her face, and wished he could offer something more than silence. A knock rattled the door. Miss Whitcomb, bustling and sharp-eyed, stood with a bundle of goods. She pushed past Eli, set flour and beans on the table, and pressed a slip of paper into Ruth's hand. "Creed's in town," she whispered. "Filed papers with the judge. He aims to have your well locked before sundown. Town's talking. Folks picking sides." Ruth's hand shook as she read, but her jaw set hard. "Thank you," she murmured, slipping a folded document, the children's birth records, into Miss Whitcomb's shopping sack. "Keep these for me." Outside, the sun glared hard off the street. As Eli walked into town, rifle tucked under his coat, Sheriff Hollis blocked his path, palm up. "Rifle, Eli, county order." Eli grunted, handed him the spare, and kept walking. He didn't bother to look back. At the mercantile, the mood was brittle. Men gathered in knots, muttering, eyes on the dirt. Eli bought wire, salt, and a handful of nails, exchanged a nod with the butcher. As he stepped outside, a shadow cut across the boardwalk, a familiar voice, low and oily. "Ruthie." Macklin Voss leaned against the far post, grinning, hat tipped. The old fear twisted in Eli's gut. He didn't pause, just walked on, but he caught the flicker of Tala's bread behind Voss, silent and watchful. Ruth traded salt for wire, her hands steady, eyes clear. "How much longer, Miss Whitcomb?" The shopkeeper squeezed her arm, voice softening. "You stand tall, honey, we're watching." Ruth nodded, tucked the wire under her arm, and headed for home. By midday, Jed came limping up the lane, hat low. They put a mark on Whitcomb's door, X in red paint, same on the feed store. Eli spat in the dust. Town's being told to choose. Inside, Ruth swept the floor, every stroke angry, determined. Etta watched from her corner, silent, clutching the edge of her skirt. "Mama, we gonna have to leave?" she asked. Ruth crouched down, pulled Etta close. "Not if I can help it." As dusk bled into the house, the tension twisted tighter. Bells from the little church on the hill struck 6, each chime echoing across the empty yards. That night, Eli made his rounds, eyes sharp for movement. He found a fresh X painted on the barn, sticky and bright. He scraped it off, hands trembling. When he came inside, Ruth was waiting. "How much more do you think they'll push?" Eli looked her in the eye, the fire throwing deep shadows across his face, till something breaks. Outside, the wind picked up again. Inside, Ruth tucked the children in, her voice low and steady. "You hold on to each other no matter what." Her words were a promise, a shield against the storm gathering outside. And through the dark, all of Dry Creek seemed to hold its breath, waiting to see who would stand and who would run. Eli woke before the sun, hands already aching with the work ahead. The ranch yard was quiet, but tension curled in the shadows like a storm threatening behind blue sky. Ruth moved beside him, face set, jaw tight, eyes rimmed with sleeplessness. Jed was already outside, his limp more pronounced, carrying a sack of nails and a coil of wire. They all understood what was coming. No one said a word. Eli walked to the windmill, running his palm along the wooden beams, listening for weakness. He dug a shallow trench along the outbuildings, poured oil from a battered tin can, scattered it with dry grass, then rolled heavy stones to block the main path. Ruth sharpened the old axe, edge glinting in the light, and packed a slab of salt pork in a cloth for Jed. No wasted movement, no nervous chatter. Inside, Etta and Noah watched with wide eyes. Etta braided a strip of red calico, fingers working fast. "For luck," she whispered, tucking it in her pocket. Noah kept close to Ruth, one hand fisted in her skirt, as if the world might break apart if he let go. Tala rode the fence line, planting short, sharp sticks in the ground to mark the wind's shift. She didn't speak, just nodded at Eli as she passed, dark eyes full of promise and warning. Mid-morning, 2 men from the sheep camp wandered up, silent and watchful. They dropped a barrel of water near the porch, nodded once, and walked back the way they came. Not a word exchanged, but Eli knew folks were choosing sides, even if they didn't want to say it out loud. As the sun crawled higher, Creed's men circled the house, slow and lazy. Creed himself stayed out of sight, but his riders watched, eyes hidden under low brims. Voss rode with them, pale scar visible under his beard, a smirk never far from his lips. Ruth watched from the kitchen window, hands curled around her tin cup. "They want us to come out, want us scared." Eli shook his head. "We don't give 'em the fight they want, not on their ground." Near sundown, Creed rode into the open. He looked at the empty yard, the trenches, the windmill, standing silent as a judge. "Thought you'd run by now, Mercer," he called. "Thought you'd know when you're beat." Eli didn't move. "You want trouble. You step where the wind sings." Creed laughed, shaking his head. "You and your ragged crew, not much left worth fighting for." He turned his horse, spitting in the dirt. "Be ready come dawn." As the riders left, the air grew thick, the world holding its breath. Eli checked the traps. Ruth fed the children. Jed cleaned his old rifle. Tala sharpened her knife by the fire. Etta curled up next to Noah, eyes open in the dark. That night the house was quieter than ever. Even the windmill seemed to hold its turning, as if waiting to see who would be left standing when morning finally broke. Dawn barely broke the darkness. Light bled into the sky, thin and colorless, while the world outside the house held itself still, waiting, dreading, hoping for something to pass. Eli pulled on his boots, slung the Winchester over his shoulder, and stepped out into the yard, breath clouding in the chill. From the north ridge came a dull thunder, the ragged cross riders, a dozen men or more, kicking up dust and snorting their horses, moving as one, faces masked and hard. At their head rode Creed, silver badge glinting on his lapel, Voss at his right shoulder, pale and grinning. Jed was up, stiff and silent, hands gripping his battered rifle. Ruth pushed the children behind her, Etta clutching Noah's hand so tight her knuckles shone white. Tala crouched in the shadows by the woodpile, knife and bow ready, every muscle drawn taut as a bowstring. The riders fanned out along the fence line, slow and deliberate, their movements measured. Sheriff Hollis appeared from nowhere, his star half hidden beneath a faded coat, eyes darting from Creed to Eli, hands empty but not idle. He didn't say a word, just watched, like a man hoping to stay invisible. Creed called out, voice flat and steady, echoing across the yard. "This is your last chance, Mercer. Hand over the well, the house, the land. Walk away, and no one gets hurt." Eli didn't answer, just cocked the rifle and planted his boots by the windmill, eyes fixed on the line of riders. Ruth stood in the doorway, the Henry rifle in her hands, mouth pressed into a line that promised no compromise. Creed's men started forward, slow at first, testing the ground. Jed fired a warning shot into the dirt, dust spitting up. Tala let fly a single arrow, skimming the lead rider's hat, sending the horse skittering sideways. The sheepmen's barrel of water, set just so, caught the sun and blinded the next wave. Eli waited, heart hammering until the first man crossed the oil-soaked trench. He lit a match, tossed it down, and a wall of flame leapt up, heat searing the morning air, driving the horses into chaos. Men shouted, scrambled, firing wild into the sky. The wind shifted, smoke rolling over the field, stinging every eye. Through the confusion, Voss broke for the house, gun drawn, but Tala tripped his horse with a thrown lariat, sending him sprawling. Creed circled back, barking orders, but his men were scattered, their lines broken by fire and panic. Eli didn't chase. He stood by the windmill watching as the riders gathered themselves and retreated, curses thrown over their shoulders, threat thick in every backward glance. Creed spat in the dust, rage dark on his face. "You bought time, Mercer. That's all you got. This isn't over." As the sun climbed, the fire died back. The yard was scarred and blackened, fence posts singed, but the house stood, smoke curling from the chimney. The sheepman's barrel rolled out to the gate, water sloshing. Sheriff Hollis lingered at the road, eyes fixed on Eli. He nodded once, small and sad, then turned away. Inside, Ruth let out a breath she hadn't known she'd been holding. She knelt, pulled the children into her arms, pressing her lips to their hair. Eli leaned against the windmill, head bowed, shoulders shaking just once, then straightened, eyes hard. "Not today," he muttered. "Not ever." The wind carried the smell of scorched earth, the sound of battered men, and the hope that, just maybe, one stand might be enough to hold off the world a little longer. The house felt thin and hollow after the fight, every board and shingle holding the echo of gunshots and shouted threats. Sunlight crept across the porch, slow as an old hound, but no one inside felt its warmth. Ruth moved through the kitchen on soft feet, spooning broth into battered tin cups, wiping her hands on her skirt, never pausing long enough to think. Eli sat at the table, boots caked with soot, jaw set, eyes distant. He scrawled a note on a scrap of brown paper, the letters rough and hurried. "If I don't make it back by dark, keep the lamp lit. Tell Etta and Noah not to fear the wind. Tell Ruth, tell her I meant every word." He folded it small, tucked it beneath the salt jar, and pulled on his coat. "I'm going out to the Blanco Cut," he said, voice gravelly. "They'll come again. Better they find me first than come crawling up to this door." Ruth's hands balled into fists. "You don't go alone. Not now." She kissed Etta and Noah, whispered something only mothers can say, then wrapped her shawl tight and followed Eli to the yard. Jed hobbled after, shotgun over his arm, eyes fierce beneath bushy gray brows. Tala checked her bow, slung a quiver over her shoulder, and fell in behind them without a word. They moved west, the wind cutting across their faces, the world hushed and waiting. Ruth glanced back just once, saw the children and Miss Whitcomb watching from the porch. Etta clutching Noah, both faces pressed to the window. She tucked a lock of Etta's hair behind her ear, in memory. Swallowed hard, and kept walking. Down by the old riverbed, the tracks showed plain. Hoofprints, boot marks, a double-scored X cut deep into the dry clay. Jed knelt, touching the ground with 2 fingers. "They ain't far. Tala, you see." Tala pointed, silent, leading them along a narrow wash toward the rising sun. Every step was thick with fear and something heavier. Determination, pride, maybe love, too stubborn to speak itself out loud. A distant whistle broke the silence, sharp and cold. "That'll be the syndicate train," Jed muttered. "Paper and steel, both." They moved faster, keeping to the shadows, boots sinking in silt. The trail twisted, marked here and there with bits of bright red string. Someone was leading them. Ruth's heart hammered in her chest, but she pressed on. At the edge of the arroyo, they stopped, breaths fogging in the chill. Eli handed Ruth his old handkerchief, pressed, her fingers tight. "If this goes sideways, you run. You don't look back. Tell the kids, tell 'em I tried." She shook her head, voice fierce and raw. "Not leaving." Not again. They waited, hidden by the rocks as the sun climbed higher, and the distant shouts of men drifted on the wind. They could see Creed's men gathering in the distance, Voss's hat a dark spot in the crowd. Tala whispered, "They're waiting for us to blink first." Eli's grip tightened on his rifle. "We don't blink." Behind them, Ruth steadied herself, breathing in the dust, the fear, the stubborn hope that somehow, some way, they'd find their way home again, together. At the Blanco Cut, where the red rocks closed in and the world narrowed to a ribbon of sky, Eli found the waiting. The ragged cross riders gathered in the shadow of the cliffs, guns at their sides, eyes hungry and cold. Creed sat his horse in the middle, suitcoat pressed, badge glinting, mouth set in a line that promised nothing but pain. Voss leaned against a boulder, hat low, fingers drumming on his thigh. The stench of old sweat and anger hung heavy in the air. Jed moved up behind Eli, shotgun balanced loose in his grip, eyes scanning the draw. Tala slipped away, circling high, moving like a ghost over the stones. Ruth knelt behind a crooked juniper, eyes fixed on the men below, hands knotted in her skirt, breath held in her chest. Creed's voice echoed off the stone. "You come to surrender, Mercer, or just to bleed for a patch of dust?" His men shifted, rifles raised, boots grinding gravel. Eli stepped forward, rifle steady. "You want water, take a drink. You want land? Plant a flag. But you lay a hand on what's mine, you'll find out what standing alone really means." Voss spat, lip curled. "Ain't yours, not by paper, not by blood. Ruth belongs with me." The words snapped through the air, sharp as a whip. Ruth stood then, full height, eyes hard. "You had your chance, Macklin, lost it the day you raised your hand." Voss sneered, stepping closer, but Ruth met him with the cold steel of Eli's revolver, pointed at his knee. "You ever touch me, touch these kids, and you'll crawl home on one leg. Not yours, not anymore." Creed barked, "Enough!" He waved his men forward. A shot rang out, wild and high, but it sent everyone scattering for cover. Tala let fly an arrow, grazing the shoulder of a man at the rear. Jed fired, clipping another's hat clean off. Dust, shouts, flashes of gunmetal, chaos rolled through the cut like a stampede. In the scramble, Voss lunged for Ruth. She fired, the bullet slamming into his leg. He went down, cursing, blood blooming through his trousers. Eli shouldered through, grabbed Voss by the collar, slammed him against the stone. "You take one more step toward Dry Creek, you'll get worse." Creed, gun in hand, glared at Sheriff Hollis, who finally stepped out from cover, badge held high. "Drop it, Silas. Enough blood for one morning." Creed hesitated, but townsfolk, drawn by the noise, began to gather at the rim, eyes hard, jaws set. Sheriff's voice cut through, tired but sure. "You fire again, I put you in irons." Creed dropped his gun, shoulders sagging. Voss spat blood and curses, crawling away. Ruth stood trembling, but she didn't lower her aim until Eli was between her and the threat. Jed picked up Creed's pistol, passed it to Hollis. Tala stepped out of the shadows, face smudged with dust, arrow notched. "Go on," she said to the riders. "Ain't nothing for you here." Slowly, Creed's men mounted up and rode out, dragging Voss behind, dust swirling in their wake. The crowd watched in silence, no one cheering, only the soft sigh of relief passing from person to person, like wind through prairie grass. Eli turned to Ruth, face open, eyes bruised and raw. For a moment, words failed. Ruth nodded, a single, sharp motion. It was enough. The morning sun crested the mesa, catching the sweat and blood on every face, and the world, still bruised, still wary, tilted toward home. The next morning, Dry Creek woke to a silence, thick and bright. Eli stepped outside and felt the air shift. The windmill creaked back to life, catching a new breeze, and a steady trickle of water filled the trough beneath. Ruth watched from the doorway, flour dusting her hands, a tired smile tucked at the corners of her mouth. Etta and Noah raced to the yard, laughter ringing like the first rain after drought. Jed sat on the porch, boots up, nursing a black eye, but grinning as if nothing on earth could bother him. Tala whittled a sliver of mesquite into an arrowhead, the tip of her tongue peeking between her teeth. Neighbors began to arrive, one by one. A shepherd set down a bucket of sweet water by the steps. Miss Whitcombs brought a sack of flour, nodding at Ruth with a smile both proud and soft. Even Sheriff Hollis rode up, hat in hand, offering a slow tip and a silent promise to do better. Inside, the old tin cup rattled as Etta filled it to the brim. She pressed it into Eli's hand and whispered, "Papa." For a second, Eli's world narrowed to that cup, that word, the steady weight of a child's trust. He set the cup aside and gathered Etta and Noah in his arms, holding them like he'd never let go. Ruth watched, her eyes shimmering, but when Eli looked up, she only said, "Breakfast's getting cold." They ate together, crowded around the table, voices low, shoulders brushing, the world outside locked out by the warmth of that morning. Afterward, Ruth and Miss Whitcomb kneaded Johnny cake dough, their laughter drifting through the open window. Jed and Tala fixed the windmill, oiled the hinges, reset the fence. No orders needed, just the easy rhythm of folks who'd seen enough to know what mattered. The sun was high before anyone remembered the wounds from the night before. Eli flexed his sore hand. Ruth's sleeve hid a fresh scrape, but neither spoke of pain. Some hurts you live with, some you heal. Later, Etta slipped away and carved 3 small letters, M-E-R, into the base of the porch post. Mercer, Etta, Ruth. The sun flashed off the knife, and for a moment the whole house glowed gold. When the sky turned pink and the fields cooled, Eli brought Ruth a cup of coffee, hot and black. They sat side by side on the steps, the children leaning against them, the smell of baking bread sweet on the air. For a long while, nobody spoke. The windmill turned, steady and true, and the water rose clear and cold from the well. Eli looked at Ruth, his voice gravel low. "I won't leave. Not ever." She reached for his hand, squeezed it tight. "Then stay and eat, old man." Night came soft. They sat on the porch as the stars blinked alive. Somewhere inside, Etta pressed her hand to the lantern glass, watching the flame dance, her name now part of the wood forever. The family sat together, backs to the wall, listening to the windmill tapping time, a song of all they'd lost and everything they'd found. No fancy vows, no promises in front of a crowd. Just the simple weight of a man's word and the warmth of a house that would never again stand empty. In Dry Creek, New Mexico, the wind carried the story of folks who stood and didn't run. And inside, where the light burned warm, the words hung in the air. heavy, true, and enough to hold a home together.